Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Mbilima 1004 wash processed Rwanda from Yoshihara Coffee. And there's the bag right there. And Yoshihara, based out of Kyoto, Japan. And this is their first ever appearance on this channel, as they're a coffee roaster I had zero familiarity with going into this review. We picked this coffee up from Airworks as part of their Golden Week special release, and of the coffee roasters that were featured in that release, this is the only one that I had never tried before. In fact, the only thing I knew about this coffee roaster was the information that Airworks had provided beforehand, and that is that the founder of Yoshihara is the former head roaster of Kurasu, which is a coffee roaster that I do have a fair bit of familiarity with. Even then, it'll be interesting to see how this one turned out. This right here is day 43. And recipe we went with for this coffee was a toned down one at a 15:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 92 degrees Celsius, about 197 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the Chemex, which indicates a more medium grind. Roast profile for this one. Interestingly enough, of the coffee roasters featured within that Golden Week release, this one did feel the lightest among them. Even then, it's certainly not an overly light coffee, as I can definitely see a fair bit of similarities to Kurasu, which we've previously described oftentimes as being on the more medium light, if maybe on the more medium side of that medium light side of things. And this one definitely did offer a little bit more of those developed qualities, but even then, I would say just in comparison to the vast majority of Japanese coffee roasters that we have reviewed on this channel, it's for the most part on par with those other experiences. So for that reason, we can say closer to that medium light side of things by most standards and metrics. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 21, first impression through the V60, and the coffee was offering an unusual experience off brew, as it did have a very slight herbal minty quality to it that did seem to dissipate as it cooled. And in hindsight, I kind of wish we would have been able to replicate that a little bit more throughout this one, as it was an ever fleeting quality just based off that first try. From this point, it was expectedly Rwandan-like, with plenty of these strong savory tea qualities and an abundance of wildflower honey. Otherwise, some tart berries and a bit of bright citrus, but overall it was an okay first impression. I think the large takeaway I had from this one was that this coffee also wasn't particularly light. I think going into it, of the three coffee roasters, given that I'd had familiarity with Solcott, I was kind of hoping that Yoshihara might be a little bit or notably lighter than some of the experiences we've had from Kurasu. And I've heard Kurasu has been a little bit more developed recently, but even then, I just kind of felt like this one was pretty similar to the experiences that we've had anyway. Day 24 through the Chemex, and the coffee does seem to be lacking a little bit, as it felt like it could possibly be under extracted. Off brew, there was a very slight roasty quality that did seem to dissipate as it cooled down, with a slight bitterness, but a mostly hollow feel. And that was kind of surprising, as I felt like, given we were brewing this with our standard recipe, the coffee probably should have had a little bit more intensity to it. Only a little bit of the Rwandan-like savory quality, so this one was just another okay day as of this moment, and neither of the first two impressions definitely yielded anything particularly impressive. Day 27 through the UFO Brewer, and there were some more mixed feelings on this one, as it's offering a little bit more of those savory Rwandan qualities off brew before it settles into a slightly more robust experience. So once again, that's a little bit more of that development at play within this one. Honey does continue to remain a more prominent quality, with a sharp nuttiness as well. So this was an okay day, but for the most part, the notes have been a little bit all over the board, as we've experienced an abundance of things without a lot of consistency to it outside of the slightly roasty quality. Day 30 through the V60 with some lower extraction adjustments. So 15:1 and 92 degrees Celsius. I mentioned in our Lilo review that I actually liked that recipe for a lot of the coffees that we've had from Japanese coffee roasters, and it definitely did seem to help mitigate a fair bit of the more developed qualities, leading to a much more well-defined Rwandan-esque experience, with the listed honey quality being the most prominent it had been to this point, as it had the most level of cleanliness and clarity and the most amount of intensity in that honey-like sense. In addition to that, a little bit more citric forward, but just better in terms of the cleanliness, and for that reason, it was a big win for me, as it certainly helped to mitigate some of those more developed qualities within this one. Day 33 through the Chemex with the same adjustments, and the coffee was the best it had been to this point, largely due to the adjustments that we had made, as those robust qualities have been notably toned down, offering significantly better clarity to the fruit characteristics, as there's a little bit more of a stone fruit quality in a better defined sense, as well as a sweeter orange-like aspect to it. And given some of the early experiences I did have with this coffee, I was a little skeptical that we could actually get those sort of characteristics from this coffee, but here we were as of this moment, finding a lot more cleanliness and definition to those qualities, with the honey being a very prominent quality within the finish as well. Day 36 final notes we have, these are 100-gram bags, so just a couple of days worth of notes through the Chemex, and there was a similar sentiment this time around as well, as it's very Rwandan-like with a high fruit quality to go with a very prominent floral honey feel to it. A wild floral honey is the most prominent note, especially within the finish, but it's combined with a slight raisin-like quality, and given that there's a darker theme to this coffee, which I'm fully expecting, given that it is a Rwandan coffee, that's not too surprising. Otherwise, a notable syrup-like aspect with a combination of red berries, plum, and slight citrus, so a lot of those darker fruit qualities that I'd mentioned, and that citric being a little bit more bitter as well. Very fruity with a lot of heavier qualities being toned down this time around as well. So a lot of positives that I could take away by the time that we'd come away from this coffee. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have a lot of level 4s. Let's go through it, and we'll start with the cleanliness level 4. I don't think that's actually too generous, given that there is enough of development to kind of hinder that experience. Towards the end, I was able to mitigate that so much to the point where the definition to the fruit qualities within this one were abundant enough, especially the honey-like aspect to this one, where it was justified at that level 4 mark. So I don't actually have an issue with that being there. It may not necessarily be the cleanest coffee out there, largely because of that profile, but even then, I found just really nice definition to the vast majority of the qualities within this one. Finish, level 4. I don't mind that it had a combination of the savory honey qualities or savory tea qualities and honey qualities that is often associated with Rwandan coffees. I know we've definitely had a fair bit of those in the past, and this one definitely offered a very prominent and lasting wildflower honey quality to this one. So level 4, where we opted to put that, very pronounced and very lingering within this one. Sweetness, level 4. Definitely very sweet in that sense once again as well. That's primarily where we got a lot of the sweetness within this coffee, because the fruit characteristics in this one I wouldn't necessarily say are overly sweet. If anything, at times they can be a little bit tart, a little bit bitter, but the sweetness was primarily coming from that very prominent honeyed quality to this one. Acidity, level 4. That was fully expected, even the profile being what it is. It is a Rwandan coffee, and they tend to be also on the brighter side of things, offering a lot of similarities to Kenyan coffees in that sense. So wasn't really surprised by that. Let's go ahead. If there's one thing I really want to note about that, it's that the citrus was a little bit more prominent in terms of the acidity than I was expecting. Florality, level 4. I've mentioned over and over that the honey quality within this one was the most abundant, and it was presenting in a floral but also sweet sense, so that's why the florality is as high as it is. Berry fruit, level 4. I don't know if we ever came up with a very notable description. Raisin was one of the qualities that I mentioned. Red berries, so very Rwandan-like in that sense, but definitely an abundance of those. I can't quite recall whether or not they had any sort of berry note list on here, but that's something that I usually associate with Rwandan coffees as well. So level 4, where we opted for that one as well. Citrus fruit, level 4. There were some really nice citric qualities to this one. It can be bitter at times, so it can be a bit more reminiscent of something like a grapefruit. But in addition to that, I was able to get a sweeter orange from time to time as well. So positives and negatives in that citric sense, even then level 4, as it was definitely the second most abundant fruit quality within this one. And then we have a couple of level 3s, handful of them actually. We'll start with the spice level 3. Those are Rwandan coffees. They do tend to have that very spiced black tea feel to them, and this one was no exception to that, as it definitely did seem to play a significant role in the way that we experienced this coffee. So level 3, where we opted to put that. Stone fruit, level 3. If anything, I was really hoping to get a lot more of those plum characteristics to this one, as at times it was present, and if I could get that in a much more pronounced sense, I would have been a fair bit more happy with this coffee. Level 3, where we opted to put it nonetheless. Savoriness, level 3. Yeah, a lot of these savory black tea qualities to this one throughout the entirety of it. Not really surprising there. And then the final thing worth discussing, the body, level 3. Definitely plenty of texture to it. I mentioned that it did have a little bit more of a syrupy body the majority of the time that we were working with it, even with it being brewed through the Chemex, which does go to show that it was always intended to just have a little bit more texture in general. So as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it is a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. It goes without saying that the profile isn't necessarily in line with my own preferences. I definitely do look for something a little lighter than this coffee was. That being said, we were able to get it to a point where I found it to be pleasant. Like, this isn't a coffee that I would ever go back to and continuously revisit time and time again. But I found that there were a lot of positives to this one once we were able to get it at its kind of sweet point, and that does include plenty of the sweetness that it did offer. In addition to that, it was cleaner, as I did have some skepticism on the cleanliness of this one as well, given just how robust it did feel at the very start. Outside of that, there are plenty of fruit qualities, and even if I'm not usually the biggest fan of Rwandan coffees, largely because I'm not the biggest fan of that savory tea quality to it or the red berry qualities, I found this one to be enjoyable, especially when you are able to get maybe some of the more sweet qualities to present themselves in place of those tart, bright, and citric qualities to this one. So definitely a lot of positives to be taken away from this one, and that does lead into the type of person I would suggest this coffee to. It does have a nice combination of all of those factors, so it definitely does offer plenty of the classic Rwandan-like characteristics to it, mostly thinking in that tea-like sense, that bright sense, and also that citric sense. But at the same time, if you do enjoy those qualities with a little bit more texture body to it and just some additional depth, as it definitely had some very enjoyable darker fruit-themed qualities to it as well. And most specifically, the best part of this coffee for me was that honeyed quality and characteristic, giving this one a little bit more depth, as I know a lot of people really did enjoy it from the exposure therapy coffee. This one offered that in a maybe less intense sense, but even then equally as, we'll say, defined sense in terms of that specific honey quality. I think for the most part, that's the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Mbilima 1004 wash processed Rwanda from Yoshihara Coffee. Thank you for watching.